Gather round, children, and let Uncle Ballsy tell you the story of the lonely little tank. Jackson was a Tier 6 American tank destroyer. He hadn't been in the job very long. He wasn't entirely sure of where to go. He knew that his peers liked to sit on top of the hill or around the edge of the gully. But he realised that if he knew that, then the enemy artillery would also know it, and he didn't fancy having a high explosive shell lobbed into his cockpit. He decided to wander off into the dunes, following the Sherman 3, a British Tier 5 medium tank. Also coming along was an AMX ELC BIS light tank, for which Jackson was grateful, as, like most tank destroyers, he didn't have very good eyesight, and was counting on somebody else spotting the enemy so that he could fire at them. Looking around, he noticed that not many of his colleagues were coming into the dunes, except for one cheeky artillery. He hoped that the grill would offer effective support for himself, the AMX, and the Sherman. He trundled off down the one line, hoping to find a position in the corner where he could take pot shots at any sneaky peekers looking over the crest of the dunes. Planting himself in the corner, he turned to face the enemy, waiting for someone to make a mistake. Soon enough, the AMX spotted a German medium tank, the VK-3001, but the cunning Kraut wasn't in any hurry to show Jackson his nose. Jackson kept his eye on the ridge, willing the enemy medium to peek. Getting a little bored, he backed up, did a bit of a dance, and kept watching the ridge. With the VK stubbornly refusing to become a target, the AMX decided to get closer, to see what the hold-up was. He approached the ridge, poked his nose over the top, and got a shell in the face for his troubles. Another hit on the AMX unsettled the little light tank, and he began to make a retreat. Looking around, Jackson noticed that the Sherman had also begun to make its way back towards their base. Seeing that the enemy forces in the hills had already overcome the defenders, Jackson thought that a single VK was less of a threat than the sizable force in the hills. He didn't like being left all alone in the dunes, and made his way back to the base and relative safety. Creeping around the corner of a dune, pulling up beside the AMX, he hoped to get shots into the gully, but no one could be spotted down there. He contented himself with taking blind shots over towards the hills. With so many tanks up there, surely he must hit something. As the AMX left him once again, Jackson once again began feeling lonely and, to be honest, a little nervous. He knew that he would make a juicy target for the VK should it decide to come across the dunes, and motored even closer to his base. Passing the oddly placed grill, He took a position where he hoped to snipe any enemies that came closer to the base. An M4 and a Churchill 7 were spotted. They were outside the render range. Jackson couldn't see them. He moved a little closer and waited for them to come back into sight. A gaggle of enemy mediums were spotted sneaking into base via the one line, obviously hoping to overrun the defenders. Jackson crept down the hill thinking to get a shot as they approached. There was the Churchill! A shot and a miss. He lined up for another shot. This time he hit. Taking a large chunk of the enemy heavy's remaining hit points, he left it an easy kill for the Skoda T25. With that threat out of the way, Jackson moved to get a better line on the encroaching mediums. Taking cover behind a slight rise and some bushes, he waited for the Cheeto or M4A1 to make a mistake. But the enemy was too cautious. Concerted fire rained down upon the tenacious enemy, and the M4 was knocked out. Jackson put aside his fear and moved even closer, hoping to do some more damage from the bushes at the edge of the gully. Proximity spotted by the T-34 85M. He thought it only a matter of time before the enemy artillery had him in their sights and quickly moved down towards the one line and the Cheeto. He spotted the Japanese tank, and his team took advantage. Jackson managed to get a shot off, doing damage and bouncing the Cheeto's shell before it too was destroyed by his team. Knowing that there were two heavily damaged enemy below, he dropped into the gully. He bounced the shot by the T-34 85M and let loose his own shot, knocking out the Russian medium tank. Ever wary of enemy clickers, he crept through the gully. He poked his nose around the corner and lined up the Covenant and light tank. Taking out the last of its hit points with a quick shot as his own artillery took out the enemy Stug 3G. The situation was now looking promising, with 5 of his teammates against only 3 enemy. His colleagues, the M4, M44 that is, and Grill artillery, the T-34S medium and a Stug 3G, were faced with a Hummel, a Grill and an AT-8, none of which had yet been spotted. Jackson's team began to move up, and the AT-8 was spotted in the dunes. Jackson lined him up and damaged him before the crafty tank destroyer ducked back down behind the rise. The Stug moved along the gully's edge, while Jackson wondered to himself whether the enemy artillery might have begun to desert their base in favour of running and hiding. He moved northwest across the sand in the hope of finding the enemy clickers along the upper zero line. Knowing that he was likely to encounter artillery, he had sensibly loaded high explosive shells for the lightly armoured SPGs. His little engine labouring as it pulled him around the dune, he found a line of sight on the enemy base, and no artillery hiding at C0 or D0. The grill was spotted. Jackson took aim across the gully and hit it, destroying it with a single shot. Jackson's teammate, the T-34S, spotted the other artillery. Jackson quickly followed the Stug to try to get a shot at it. Approaching the enemy base, he saw that the T-34S was valiantly engaging the Hummel. His teammate landed a single shot before falling to the Hummel's firepower. Vowing to avenge his colleague's death, Jackson sped across the enemy base. With only the Hummel and the AT-8 remaining, Jackson and the Stug moved in for the kill. With their artillery raining fire down upon the last known position of the enemy, the Stug spotted the Hummel, and both he and Jackson moved in for the easy kill. But the wily SPG took cover behind the rocks. As Jackson and the Stug moved closer, they saw the trap. The AT-8 was also there. Jackson took a hit from the British tank destroyer, quickly moving to cover. Keeping the rocks between himself and the enemy, he saw the Stug take fire. His teammate destroyed the Hummel, but was exposed to the AT-8's gun. He bravely tried to land his shots, but was killed by the AT. Jackson knew that the AT-8 had serious frontal armour, and didn't like his chances in the head-to-head clash, so he ducked into a nearby gully, running like a little girl, hoping to just get around the next corner before the enemy tank destroyer caught up. His own artillery was pre-aiming at the spot where they expected the AT to show its face, and Jackson moved through the trees in order to spot it for his team. He saw it. The AT-8 had turned, thinking to catch Jackson head-on as he rounded the rocks, fortunately leaving his rear end exposed to Jackson's view. He took his shot, bringing the AT's hit points down, before rocking back and forth behind cover, in an effort to keep the enemy spotted while not becoming a statistic himself. Trading another shot from the AT, he saw that his team's artillery was not having a lot of effect on the British tank destroyer, hunkered down in the lee of the rocks, so he moved up, trying to circle around the enemy again. The AT wasn't playing ball, however, and turned again to prevent a repeat shot on the backside. With time running out, and his artillery ineffective on the sheltered enemy, Jackson had one last ace up his sleeve. He drove to the top of the hill, dropped his nose over the edge, and fired. The well-placed shot destroyed the last enemy, giving his team the win. He was a happy little tank destroyer.